Hello, folks. Dick Fairburn here. This week I have the opportunity to have sat down with Jeff Hoffman at Black Hills Ammunition in his plant here in Rapid City. And I've asked him, we're going to talk about some gun related issues, as well a couple of stories about things that he's done in his life that I think you'll find amusing. And one of them involves Bill Jordan. Bill Jordan, as I understand it, Jeff used to show up here once in a while, and you two would go out and shoot some prairie dogs together.
Absolutely, and to be clear, Dick, there's two Bill Jordans in the industry. One of them's famous for camo. The other one was a famous
That's
gun
correct.
writer from many years ago. Border Patrol for 33 years. Excellent pistol shooter. Used to do demonstrations on things like What's My Line, where he would start with Nico wafers and then shoot lifesavers, then shoot aspirin tablets on TV. In that period of time, you could do stuff like that with wax bullets. But yeah, we got introduced to Bill, and we became very good friends, and we had a lot of good times together.
You say he had a secret weapon for shooting prairie dogs?
Oh, he did. One time we'd show up for work, and we'd see his Airstream trailer parked out front and hooked up to our plug-in, and we'd go, well, we're not going to get anything done today because Bill's going to want to go shoot prairie dogs. So we'd load up a bunch of ammo with not inspected, just right off of the machines, and we'd load them in the truck, and we'd set out and shoot prairie dogs. And one time he shows up, and we get ready to go shoot prairie dogs, and he's got a big cardboard box and sets it in his lap. And I said, Bill, what do you got there? He says, in his southern drawl way, he had a big Louisiana accent. He says, it's a secret weapon. I'll show you, but I'll show you when we get there. And so we get out on the Dogtown, and he opens up the box, and he's got a piece of rubber hose about this long that's split down the edge, and he rolls the window part way up, and that's his cushion on the window for his adjustable shooting rest. And then he reaches in the box, and he's got one of these little metal windmills like this, but it's got instead of three legs, it's got one leg with a magnetic base. I said, what are you going to do with that, Bill? He says, I'll show you. So he gets out and he mounts it on the hood of the truck, and that's his wind gauge to show the wind velocity. And he got pretty good at gauging wind velocity. It would give him wind velocity, and it would give him wind angle. And one of the first Kestrels, if you will, Bill was probably the predecessor. His secret weapon was the predecessor to the modern Kestrel, give you wind velocity and angle. And Bill was a little bit hard of hearing because he'd been through World War II, Korea, spent a lifetime shooting, and so he turns to me when he gets that all set up, and he says, you might not have noticed, but he says, I'm a mite hard of hearing. He says, so if you got anything to say to me, you best says it now. You go, okay, Bill. So he takes out his hearing aids, puts in some foamies, and then he puts his hearing muffs on over the top of that. And we drive out onto the Dogtown, and there's dogs all over. So he puts his rifle on the rest on that piece of rubber hose, and he's all sighted in, and he looks up out of the corner of his left eye he was on the passenger side, so he's looking up at the hood, and he's gauging wind and angle, and he's adjusting his hold, and he squeezes, and he kills the dog. And he says, did I get him? I said, yeah, Bill, you got him. He says, what? I said, yeah, Bill, you got him. He says, speak up, son. I can't hear you. And Bill was more than a mite hard of hearing. By the time I got through to him that he'd shot that dog, it was a yelling contest. But in my mind, he was a bit late shutting the barn door. The horse was already gone. But we had a lot of fun with Bill. He was a heck of a handgun shooter. I think it was on that same trip we come along and saw a dog out the window at about 75 yards, and I said, shoot him, and he says, well, there ain't no sport to that. And I said, well, shoot him with a pistol. He says, I don't got my pistol. And my .45 was sitting on the dash, so I said, well, shoot him with mine. So he says, how's she sighted? And I told him where to hold. So he pulls that out and sights on that dog and sucked him right out of the hole with one shot with a .45 that he'd never touched before. I'm sure he'd shot a lot of .45s before, but that was the first time he'd shot with mine. So Bill was a good shooter with a pistol or a rifle.
I'm sure
he was quite a man.
Yeah. And speaking of prairie dogs, you told me a prairie dog story that that's stuck in my mind, and I think the viewers would enjoy if you could sterilize this enough to avoid the statute of limitations. Maybe.
This is a pretty good story, and to give us plausible deniability, I'll say that this is a story, and sometimes stories are just that, just stories, but it's a pretty good story. And I'll also say that to the best of my knowledge, no laws were broken and no animals were hurt during the course of part of this video. But we had a friend who in the industry, and he'd worked for most everybody in the industry, and when he sees this video, he might remember this deal, and he might get a clue as to how it all happened. But he'd worked for various people in the industry, and at the time he was working for the Israelis, IMI, and he calls up and he says, Jeff, he says, the boys are coming out and they'd like to visit. And I said, well, that'd be good. And he's talking about IMI. And he says, they'd like to go shoot some dogs. And I said, well, I can arrange that. And he says, can I come? And I said, well, of course you can. And so at that point, I'm sitting in the living room and I'm thinking to myself, we have to make this memorable for our friend, industry friend. I said, I wonder how we could do that. And my eyes fell on one of my daughter's black plastic squeeze rats, you know, the black plastic rat about like that. And I thought to myself, you know, if we took this dog and cut his ears off and cut his tail down and spray painted him tan, he would, that'd look just like a prairie dog, and I could probably play a trick on our friend. And then I thought, well, that's kind of boring. What would happen if we filled that prairie dog with dynamite? And with the help of a friend of mine who was a chief blaster, a former Special Forces demo sergeant in Vietnam, we rigged up this dog ahead of time. And I go out the day before our industry friend gets there, and I kill about a dozen prairie dogs. And then I find a spot about 200 yards in from the front gate and set this dog up, this fake dog plastic dog filled with dynamite, set him up on the edge of the prairie dog hole, and ran det cord up the bottom of that dog and ran it down into the bottom of the hole, and attached another stick at the end of that in the bottom of the hole, and then I filled that hole up with dead prairie dogs. And you know, I was early in my exposure to high explosives at that point. This gentleman gave us considerable training as part of the special response team, and he allowed me to assist on blasting, and he put me through a blaster course. So, but I was still in the world of explosives a touch inexperienced as to the effects. So I get to have this all set up, and then the next thing I do is I go back to the shop and I get some 223 rounds and I tape them up and I spray paint the tips of them fluorescent orange, and then I put them in a jewelry box and I put them in the glove box of the truck. And so the next day we pick up our industry friend and all of his Israeli friends, and we climb in my truck and we drive out there, and on the way there I say to my friend, reach in the glove box there's a jewelry box, I need you to look inside there. So he pulls the jewelry box out and he opens that up and he goes, whoa, these are special, what are these? I said, yeah, they're special. He said, what do they do? And I said, I'll show you when we get there. So I said, load your gun up with those, careful. And when we get out there, I want you to shoot a dog with those. So we get to the gate, and we've got this all set up. I got our reactive dog sitting about 200 yards out there, and I go, yeah, and we pull up, and he's the passenger. So in the west, the passenger gets to the gate. get to the gate, and I told him, "Whoa, hold up." I said, "There's a dog out there." And I'm looking through the glasses, and he says, he's just looking at it with his naked eye. He says, "That's not a dog." I said, "Mike, it's a dog. Get your gun on him and shoot him." So he gets his scope up. He says, "By golly, it's a dog." I said, You're right. That's a dog. Shoot him." So he shoots, and I see the shot go right over the top of him. And I'm thinking, this is not going to work unless he hits the dog. And so I said, "Right over the top, Mike. Hold at the base of him. Send it again." So he chambers another round, shoots, and big explosion. There's dirt 100 feet in the air. And I'm thinking at this point, our friend knows he's been had, but he doesn't. The little guys in the jump seat behind us, the little Israelis, are going, and I'm going, Mike turns to me and he says, "Oh, I released his name inadvertently there."
I got that out.
He turns and, you could probably leave it in, because by this time he knows that something went on there. But he looks at me and he says, "I like those." He said, "Do you make those in .30 caliber?" So what we did there, I said, "Go ahead and open the gate. Let's go check this out." So we go up there, and there's a smoking hole that you could hide this chair in. And if anybody that knows anything about dynamite knows its detonation velocity is far too high to do what I was trying to do. I shredded those dogs. It didn't launch them anywhere. It just shredded them. But I dug around and I found a little piece of fat and fur about the size of your fingernail, and I pulled it up and I said, "Mike, you got him, see?" And to this day, he knows he's been had, but he doesn't know how. He doesn't know, because he can't explain the body parts. But that was a pretty good trick. The danger after that was he kept wanting to shoot the other couple of rounds that were left, and I wouldn't let him do it. So we got those back safely. But that was a pretty fun trip, and one that he'll remember. And when he sees this video, he'll call me up and probably call me names.
Well, it's surprising to me that YouTube even allows them on there, but there are videos of prairie dogs being exploded by rifle fire, but not quite like that one.
Not quite like that one. This was pretty dramatic. Although Mike didn't harm any critters during the filming of this. No real critters.
Great story. One of the gun-related things that I wanted to ask you about, you have a number of different loads you produce in both 223 and 5.56. And in particular, you have a 50 grain Barnes TSX load, which is, the bullet is, as I understand it, is made just for this particular load. It's different from their normal 50.
Correct.
And could you tell us, it sounds to me like this is probably the best for police patrol, within some distance limits, and for self-defense use.
I think it's one of the very, very best choices. Barnes is a good industry partner. We've done a lot of development work with Barnes, and in this case we wanted something that was different than their standard product lineup. And over the years we've done this with a number of different companies. They will listen to us and make something, modify something that they make for our request, because they've seen that generally our instincts are pretty good, and sometimes it results in contracts if they're willing to do that. So we looked at the standard 50 grain TSX, and we asked them to toughen it up some, to modify it for best performance out of a 5.56 at that velocity, and have good barrier penetration. We wanted something with good barrier penetration. So they did that, and that's why it's called the optimized 50 grain Barnes. It's a 50 grain Barnes bullet, but it's a special production projectile for Black Hills ammunition. And it does a lot of things really well. It's a very versatile round. Being a 50 grain bullet, it will stabilize, even though it's a monolithic bullet, and being less dense than lead, and then normally longer than lead for the same given weight, it'll still stabilize in all of the 223 1 and 12 guns. For a long time, the standard 223 was 1 and 12. Starting in 1985, the military with their 5.56 went to a 1 and 7 twist. So you've got twist rates of everything between 1 and 7 and 1 and 12. This bullet will work well in all of them. It'll shoot accurately in a 1 and 7. It'll shoot accurately in 1 and 12. It'll stabilize in a 1 and 12. and it's a robust, strongly enough constructed bullet, being a monolithic copper bullet, that it will not come apart out of a 1-in-7. It's not real well known, but it's a known phenomenon that lighter weight bullets, lighter jacketed bullets, bullets that are designed for 223s out of the slower twist can come apart in flight out of a 1-in-7 twist. We've documented this. It's pretty well documented in history. You've probably seen it on the range, Dick, where you'll be training with somebody and the standard load that they always used was a 55 grain saw point, and then they've got a 1-in-7 twist rifle that they've now started issuing, and you'll see evidence of it, of bullets coming apart. First, you examine in your paper targets, you see a little eyelash-shaped curlicue around the hole, and then the next thing you'll see some yawing of the bullet, and then when it gets bad enough, you'll see bullet fragmentation if you're close enough. And that's cost people some qualifications before the range officers were savvy enough to understand the guy didn't miss, the bullet just came apart. But the key thing here that I'm talking about is that bullet being a monolithic copper, it won't do that. It'll withstand the twist of a 1-in-7, but it'll still stabilize in a 1-in-12. The significance of that is, a lot of agencies, they'll have a variety of gun issued to them. They'll have individual officer guns, issued guns, and in some cases they'll have
Lesso rifles that are kind of lend-lease from the military.
Lend-lease from the military that were M16A1s with a 1-in-12 twist. So they've got a variety of them, and what they need is a round that's accurate, performs terminally very well, and will work well in all of those twists. That's what this round was designed for. So it works really well and through all of the guns, and then it's accurate, doesn't come apart, and then terminally it's very effective. That bullet will typically, whether you're shooting a 10.5-inch gun or a 20-inch gun, it's going to stop in 14 to 15 inches of 10% ballistic gelatin, which is really where you want it to be for law enforcement. You're very effective on target, but you really minimize your chances of shooting through the perpetrator or whatever attacker, whatever problem you're trying to solve. You're able to solve that without shooting through the intended target. So that's been a very popular round. It's used by a number of agencies as a standard patrol round.
And in my experience with it, out to a couple hundred yards, the point of impact is more than close enough to, M193 loads for cheap training.
Absolutely.
You can just use them interchangeably. You can train with the cheap full metal jackets and use the 50s for duty use.
Yep, and that's a big issue for a lot of agencies because they want premium performance, but they can't afford to use it across the board. So they can train with the white box 193 stuff and then issue this as the duty load. The one caveat there, you and I both have a law enforcement background. You understand for liability purposes, you still want to qualify with the exact load. You want to zero and qualify for the exact load you're carrying. You can do that here. You can shoot up thousands of rounds in training of economical 193 type 55 FMJ stuff, and then verify your zero, do your qualification so that you're covered in court, and then issue this round, the 50 grain optimized TSX bullet.
Still talking about 223 or 5.56, Jeff. If someone wants a carbine like that for a home defense weapon, but they live in an apartment setting, so we're looking for minimum penetration, what kind of recommendation do you have for that?
I think the round that we just talked about, the 50 grain optimized TSX, if you're talking 5.56, that's would be a very good choice. A lot of people don't understand it. I had 28 years in the special response team, and early on the attitude of administration is that, oh, we can't issue 5.56s because of over penetration. And what, law enforcement administration, I think they've gotten better educated, but at that time they thought rifles being more powerful, there's more chance of shooting through than with a pistol. And in fact, one of the things most likely to shoot through people would be .45 ball, but
Sure.
they had no problem with .45 ball on duty. And what it takes is some education to show them that a proper 5.56 expanding round will penetrate no more than your standard duty round. There's a lot of standard duty rounds that'll penetrate to 14 inches. Matter of fact, the FBI standard for effective ammunition is minimum of 12, maximum of 18. This 5.56 round fits right in the middle of that. It gives you enough penetration to be effective, but yet you're not over penetrating. So as crazy as it sounds, that monolithic copper TSX bullet, the 50 grain TSX, would be a great choice for defense.
Okay. On the topic of solid copper bullets, you have a line of pistol ammunition, well, and one rifle load, 45-70, in what you call your Honey Badger line. And these are, the generic term is FTM, fluid transfer monolithic, and you use Lehigh Defense bullets. There are some in the terminal ballistics community who really think they're a gimmick, that they are really nothing more than a fancy looking full metal jacket. Tell us the experience you have of not only testing, but having these things out in the field and how effective they are as compared to a hollow point load.
I'll give you a summary in order to keep it as short as possible. We have a full-time ballistic lab with 3 or 4 people working every day in the lab, so that gives us an advantage. If we did not have that lab and somebody showed me this FTM bullet, fluted bullet, and said this is the best thing, it works as good as hollow points and it doesn't overpenetrate, I would have thought the same thing. I'm a skeptic by nature. I was originally skeptic of monolithic bullets and expanding bullets. I later proved to myself that I was wrong. With the fluted bullet designs, that's what I refer to them as, is I've learned that I would have been wrong there. When we first started with this, Dave Fricke, who was then owner of Lehigh, sent me some fluted bullets and said, "What do you think?" And I looked at them and I recognized the design. It was a Charlie Kelsey design from now 40 years ago. By that time it was, back then, 10, 12 years ago, it was about 30 years old. And so I said, yeah, they're good bullets, but they could be better. And Dave, fortunately, was not an easily offended guy. He knows me. I just say stuff the way I think it is. And he wasn't offended by that. He said, well, how could they be better? And I said, well, the design is wrong. You actually, that bullet had a narrow flute at the front and it widened out into what I call a kind of a ski slope at the back. I said, that's backwards. What you need to do is have a very narrow meat play on the front. You need a wide scoop, and you need to focus it radially as it exits the bullet. And we worked back on maybe 5 different iterations with him doing this until we got to some current designs. And what I learned was these things work very well. What we've got is a bullet that works as well as the best hollow point. It doesn't have the failure point of a hollow point, and then that it can, from your law enforcement experience, you've seen it, bullets can plug with some material, thick leather jackets or barrier material, and then not perform. They end up just like an FMJ. This fluted bullet doesn't have a hollow point design. It's very efficient at cutting through things like leather jackets or penetrating things like even to the extent of auto body material or windshields, and still doing a good job. So what you've got is a bullet that's as effective as a hollow point, but is also good on barriers and doesn't have some of the common failure points of a hollow point bullet. So over the years, we've worked on this a lot, and I've proven to myself and we've proven to other people that this is a very effective design. And one of the neat things about this is you think that, okay, if it's good on barriers, it's going to overpenetrate. That round doesn't overpenetrate. It'll still stop within 18 inches of 10% ballistic gelatin, but it's as effective as hollow points, and it's good on barriers. So I guess one thing I can say is we just won a contract with it. We proved it to the U.S. government that that design works. So I think that's pretty good confirmation.
I agree. On your 4570 load, and that's actually a pretty light pressure-wise. That's safe in a trapdoor, isn't it?
I always have to be careful answering questions like that, because when you say trapdoor, there's a lot of those that are old black powder guns, and any personal injury attorney will caution you to not recommend that somebody shoot guns that were designed for black powder with smokeless powder.
Fair enough.
But the SAMI, Sporting Arms and Ammunition Manufacturers Institute, has set a fairly low pressure level for 4570s. It's 28,000 psi. These are within the SAMI limitations of 28,000 psi. Modern guns, there's a lot of lever guns and bolt guns that'll take way more than that. We stay within that limitation just in case somebody puts it into one of the weaker design guns or a gun that hasn't had maintenance in the past 120 years, so that we want to make sure that they're still safe with it. But you're right, and the 4570 possesses incredible power. I remember the first time I ever shot a 4570, I thought, I bought this gun. Matter of fact, it's the gun I bought from you.
I remember.
And I thought, I'll pick up a box of factory ammo and I'll blow up these little wimpy loads from the factory, and then I'll load some real ones. And my first shot, I realized, holy smokes, there's a lot of power here.
Yep.
And you can look back in history, they were using those loads to shoot horses out from underneath enemy riders. There's a reason they were able to do that, even at the lower pressures.
But that Honey Badger 4570 you got, you've sent me the gelatin performance of it, and it penetrates immensely.
That load that I sent you, it's the load that's in production now, that will penetrate 33 inches of ballistic gelatin, and it leaves a wound track at its widest area of about 7 inches. Another story there, another writer friend of ours was guiding an individual on a buffalo hunt, and the guy was all lined up at about 125 yards on this buffalo, and just as he fired, the buffalo took a step, so he hit him just a little far back from where he wanted to. The buffalo took off running, and this guy, the shooter, the hunter, was actually pretty adept with a lever gun. He put 4 more in it as it ran past him, and when that buffalo fell over, a buffalo can go a long ways on if you don't hit the nervous system.
You bet.
And when that buffalo fell over, they went up and they skinned him out, and all 5 of those can go through and through on a full-size buffalo. So there's still plenty of power and performance there on even staying within SAMI pressure limits.
Yeah, I think you could probably safely take that load to Africa and kill most of the stuff over there with it.
I think you could.
You've expanded pretty heavily over into the military side. Can you tell us a little bit of background of the Mark 262 load? I think that's the most famous of the military stuff that's being used now. And especially the thing that impresses me is the just incredible accuracy standard that has to meet.
That all started in 1996. There was I got a phone call, and the gentleman introduced himself as Lieutenant Colonel Mike Harris, U.S. Army, retired. And he said, there's an Army Marksmanship Unit bid coming up, and I think you should bid on it. And at that time, we had no history at all with the military. And I said, well, Colonel, we don't know anything about doing military business, submitting bids and all. And he said, if you didn't catch the introduction, I do. And I can help you with this. He says, it's all legal, I'm retired now, but I can show you how to do the bid process. And so we agreed to work together on that. He helped us through the bid process. And the bid process was, we've learned a lot of stuff over the past 25 years, 30 years. We've learned a lot of stuff, and one thing we've learned is the government will sometimes ask for stuff that's impossible, and they were asking for something impossible on that one. They wanted a certain velocity with an 80 grain 5.56, a certain velocity within a certain pressure, and it was impossible to get there. So we looked at it and said, can we give them the velocity and at safe pressures, even though it exceeds the specified pressure, can we give it to them at a pressure that's safe? And the answer was yes. So we built that load, tested it, submitted it, and we won the contract. And but we told them in the contract, we're over pressure. And we get a call and they said, you've just won the contract. And I said, did you read our bid? We were over pressure. And they said, yeah, we know that. Everybody else was over pressure too, and you're saving 10,000 PSI over what we were doing. At that time, they had a load that they were constructing at Army Marksmanship Unit, and it was 10,000 PSI higher than what we built. So we won that bid, and then they came back to us several times and said, can you do this, can you do that? And we did several more loads. And within 3 years, we had all of the marksmanship unit business in the U.S. military, because everybody watches what AMU does, because they Army Marksmanship Unit, because they're the best funded and they have a full-time team. So consequently, better funding, full-time team, all these guys do is shoot. They're really, really good, and they win. So everybody follows them around to see what they're doing. So within 3 years, all the other marksmanship units came to us and said, can you build some of that for us? So we said, yeah, we can do that. So by '99, we had essentially all of the marksmanship 5.56 business. And at that time, the Navy Surface Warfare at Crane, Indiana called up and they said, we have this program. We're building a new rifle, specifically kind of a sniper variant of the M16. It's an M16A1 with a custom-built upper, with an accurized barrel built at Crane, suppressed and scope-sighted. And we're fielding this for combat use. We need ammunition that's accurate and effective at 600 yards. Can you do that? I said, well, we're already doing the accuracy thing. We've proven that, but I have very little knowledge about the effectiveness of 5.56 at 600 yards. And they said, do you want to play? I said, certainly, yes, sir. Well, we want to play. And what I didn't know at that time, due to our lack of experience, was that was way far out of the norm. Normally, there'll be a source of sought, and then a competition, and then they'll down select. They didn't do any of that. They just came to us and said, do you want to play? Because of our background, our successful history. So we took the AMU load, which was originally a 223 load. We put it into, we basically combat hardened it. We put it in 5.56 brass and tweaked it. And we continued tweaking it over the years from the Mod O to the Mod 1, which is what it is now. But that round became very well known in the military services because it's the only, to this day, it's still the only precision 5.56 round in the U.S. military inventory. It was very effective in combat. I think it was in 2003 that the Mark 12 rifle, which was the rifle that they were describing, that with our ammo was named one of the top 3 most effective weapon systems in Afghanistan. That was the other items that were named as most effective was the M240 and the Mark 19 grenade launcher. So we were in pretty good company with that round. The military people love it, and it's still being purchased to this day.
And it is available for civilian sale as well?
Yes, but not the exact military. For military ammunition to be called straight Mark 262, you have to test it to all of the military standards, including testing in their weapons. We obviously can't do that for commercial ammo, but we're offering a version that is the same exact construction to at least that level of performance. Matter of fact, we call it the Mark 262 Mod 1C. The Mod 1C, C stands for commercial, identifying as the commercial variant, not the military. We don't want to mislead anybody. It's the same construction, but it's a legitimate commercial round. It's not pirated military ammo. It's a legitimate commercial round. And we guarantee, matter of fact, we guarantee accuracy with it. And we put a cert in each can of this has one of the smaller cans that has 460 rounds in it. And in each can there's a cert from the bullet manufacturer Sierra that shows that it was out of an average of 10 shot groups at 300 yards, it averaged under 2 inches, 2 inches or less. That works out to 0.64 minute of angle, and that's with 10 shot groups. And one thing that I've learned over the years here is the groups will never get smaller when you add rounds to them. So when you're talking about a 3-round group, that's a 5-round group is tougher than that. When you go to a 10-round group, that's really tough. So if you're shooting sub .64 at 300 yards with 10 shot groups, you're doing quite well.
It's got to be the highest accuracy standard for any kind of military ammo, isn't it?
I know of no other factory available ammunition that provides that kind of certification with it. No, military or commercial ammunition that provides that sort of certification.
Yeah. Okay. Anything you would like to add into the video?
I think it's worth throwing in credit where credit's due. There's a number of things there. You know, the Christy, who we wouldn't have been here without her, because we.
That's your wife, Christy, you're talking about.
Oh yeah, I think we need to give some credit there. When we had a first opportunity to go into business, I was a cop. I liked being a cop. I knew how to be a cop, and my father was a businessman, an entrepreneur, but I was too busy in the early years drinking beer, shooting, and chasing Christy for me to pay any attention on how to be a businessman. Later, as a cop, I had an opportunity to go into a business with a friend making ammunition, another officer on the police department, and he offered to let us buy in, and I kind of blew it off. And later, Christy and I are laying in bed staring at the ceiling trying to figure out how to pay bills, and she says, "I wish you'd consider Tom's offer." I said, "What are you talking about? I don't know anything about business." She said, "I do." She's an accounting major. And she said, "I do, and you know a lot about ammunition. I think you ought to consider his offer, because what we're doing right now is not working." And what she was talking about is, I started on the police department in 1979, September 10, 1979, at $4.67 an hour, and thought we were going to cut a wide swath. And we were eating a lot of peanut butter and macaroni, and that's what she was talking about. So gave it careful consideration, bought into the business, bought into a negative net worth business, and I'll condense this down a lot. We made it work. It had to work because my dad had co-signed for us, and he would have lost his collateral, which was his livelihood, a semi-truck, if we hadn't survived. So we survived. We survived in large part because determination. We absolutely would not fail. We survived because I think God sometimes looks down at you and says, these people are basically incompetent, but they're really trying. I think we ought to help them out a little bit. And there's a lot of that. We surrounded ourselves with good people. You want to make sure that you've got good lawyers and accountants, and you want to make sure that you go to church once in a while, because during some of the toughest times when we were that close to failing, you ask for a little help, and he looks down, he says, "Okay, I'll help you out here." So I think you got to give credit where credit's due. We've had a lot of good breaks, but we're still here and still doing well, and love what we're doing. That's the other thing, is passion. You got to have passion for what you're doing.
Yeah. I'll kind of sum this up. I got to meet Jeff and Christy in, I think, 1991. I was writing for SWAT magazine, and the editor said, "Hey, there's this guy, over in Rapid City, not too far from where I lived, and why don't you go over there and check out this Black Hills ammunition place and write an article about it." So I had contacted Jeff, and he said, "Well, gee, bring your family, come over for the weekend, we'll go shoot some prairie dogs." And I had a Plymouth K car, and that K car, the back end was dragging the ground when I went back to Wyoming, because there were so many cases of free ammo that he shoved into the back of that car. And Jeff and I have had that long friendship, and it means so much to me, not because I got free ammo, because the incredible things that you've learned and developed as you get into the military ammunition and stuff. I mean, you're cutting edge. You've done stuff that other big ammunition companies have never done. And it just gladdens my heart to see two people come from kind of a similar start that I had and made good with their life. So, I wanted to do this video not because of what Jeff has done for me and send me ammo once in a while and stuff like that. I wanted to do it because I think he is truly an innovator in the field of ammunition, and wanted to offer this out to the folks who watch my videos. So, one last question.
Yes, sir.
9 or 45?
I'm carrying a 9 right now. I was a 1911 guy from the time I was 17 until, I was carrying a 1911 20 years past when everybody else went to plastic guns on the department. As a reserve and as an SRT officer, I would walk through the place and people might not recognize who I was, but they'd look down and see that I was carrying a 1911 and they'd go, how does he get to do that? And finally my lieutenant came to me and said, your grandfather clause has expired. You're going to have to carry a Glock like everybody else. Okay. So I'm carrying a 9 now, and the reason being that with the modern technology that's available, I think that the advantage of the 9 is you've got a hat full of ammunition. You're carrying 15 to 17 rounds normally. When I started on the police department, we had they tried to
18 rounds.
They tried to restrict us to 18 rounds.
Yeah.
That didn't count what we could hide. And
that's right.
Speed loaders and stripper clips stuffed around in various pockets.
Right.
Just because we knew that in a gunfight that wasn't going to be enough in all probability. But
yeah.
With modern to cut to it, with modern bullet technology, I think the difference is far less than what it was back in the 80s. Right now there's modern bullets that are designed and reliably expand, will penetrate, go through barriers, and so I still love a 1911. I've got like 8 or 9 of them, but I'm carrying a 9mm right now.
All right, I'll take your expertise. Thanks for sitting down with us, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Thank you again, Dick.
Before I finish, as I wrapped up the editing of this interview with Jeff Hoffman at Black Hills Ammunition, I wanted to talk about a couple of things that we had discussed that day and over the years as friends that didn't make it onto the tape. One thing that came through from both Jeff and Christy was a sense of duty that they feel to the military folks that use the very specialized military ammunition they produce. And the military loads they produce there are not for general issue. They are almost exclusively for for SOCOM, Special Operations folks that are out there. Delta, Green Berets, Navy SEALs, folks like that. I can tell you from having seen his manufacturing process from the very beginning, every single component that goes into Black Hills Ammunition is inspected thoroughly. One of the things that surprised me the first tour I got was he had rigged up a large plexiglass device where primers were placed onto that and then sandwiched between these 2 layers of plexiglass. And every single primer is visually inspected on both sides to make sure it has an anvil, to make sure it has the priming component in there. We know that anything can make it through the manufacturing process that isn't perfect. And so anything they find that isn't perfect, a case, a primer, powder, the projectiles, is kicked out of the system. After it's loaded, there's a large table with ladies with white cotton gloves who visually inspect every single round of ammunition. And if there is a nick or a dent or even just a stain, it's almost impossible for these brass components to come through without some dark spots on them. Any kind of flaw, mechanical or cosmetic gets kicked out. And having received ammunition from Jeff Hoffman over the years to use in my testing procedure for magazine articles and things like that, a lot of times we get those cosmetic seconds. There's not a thing in the world wrong with them. They're perfect in every other way. But those don't leave the factory in boxed ammunition. That is how meticulous they are. And I think Jeff's worst nightmare is that some combat soldier out there in the war on terror pulls a trigger and a round doesn't go bang. And that could somehow cost that soldier their life. So that is the dedication, and then that is the fanaticism they put into their product. And a story I told him, at one point I had a sit-down conversation with a young man who was a Delta operator. He had been one of the very first into Afghanistan after September 11th. He'd been wounded. He was back in the States recovering. And he told me that very early in that fight, that his Delta squadron was billeted very near a company of 75th Rangers. And he said the Rangers were shooting M4 carbines with green tip, M855 ammunition, which was not known to perform well except at pretty close range. He said they would occasionally hit somebody at 200 or 300 yards. They knew they hit them because they'd see dust fly out from the impact, but the bad guy would keep going. But he said we were shooting Black Hills ammo, Mark 262 ammo, with the 77 grain Sierra match hollow points. And he said when we hit them, they went down. And the Rangers knew that. And he said it got so bad we actually had to post guards on our ammo supply because the Rangers would try to sneak in at night and get the good Black Hills ammo. So when I heard that story, I immediately picked up the phone and I called Jeff and told him that. And I just heard this chuckle on the other end of the phone. Our stuff is so good, they're stealing it. These are special people. They're good friends, and I think that came through. But these are some rare individuals that our nation has produced, and they produce the best ammo they can for police officers, for war fighters, and for ordinary citizens. So I'm not being paid to say this. They don't sponsor me, and frankly, I don't want their sponsorship. We're too close. But if you buy Black Hills stuff, you're buying as good as any that's out there. Probably better than most that's out there. So having said that, folks, if these videos are useful to you, please subscribe, resubscribe, whatever you got to do. Give me thumbs up. I hope you enjoyed this video, and whatever you do, y'all be safe out there.
Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah! That's all there is till next time.